The Caliph left it and the Christians started raiding. Muslims were too weak to defend and instead they chose to counter-raid. At the same time, Beja was taken by Portugal. They harassed the citizens and forced them to flee. The city was difficult to control, so they burned it and abandoned it. Muslims came back after a truce with Portugal and tried to repopulate it. Significant money was spent on its repair and repopulation. However, an Almohad raiding party had been defeated nearby, and the people of Beja were afraid that the army might come for them next. Since the defenses weren't finished, they decided to abandon the city and move to Mertola. Muslim rule over Beja was over after 4.5 centuries. While Christians were successful at their campaigns, they were pulled back by inter-Christian rivalries. However, still they were able to fend off Muslim raids. Al-Andalus was under pressure from all sides, even the sea. The rulers there made pleas to the Caliph for help, but the Caliph was busy. First with a plague that had broken out, and then with a long and expensive campaign into Tunisia. After they were both done, he decided to expand his city instead. He arrived in Al-Andalus in 1184, and this time he brought siege engines. First thing he did was install his sons to power of various important cities. Cordoba, Seville, Granada, and Murcia were given to his sons. This marks a point where power went from the sons of Abdul Mumin to the sons of Yusuf. Santarem had been used to launch many raids against the Almohad, and the Caliph decided that this would be his target. He arrived there with his army, which had all the morale and supplies it needed. The suburbs were taken and a siege was started. However, here too the Caliph lost his nerve after getting the news that the king of Leon was coming to relieve the city. He thought that his army was exposed, so he ordered the camps be moved across the river. Confusion and panic once again broke out and the Caliph was left mostly alone in a conspicuous red tent, which was attacked by the garrison of the city, and Yusuf was mortally wounded, dying a few days later. This campaign had been another one of Yusuf's trademark fiascos. The Caliph's death was a closely guarded secret until his son and heir Ya'qub was able to secure the support of his father's commanders and noblemen in Seville and in Marrakesh. Ya'qub was more interested in warfare than his father had been. He soon wanted to resume jihad but was occupied by a war closer to home. The Banu Ghaniya were a member of the Almoravids and ruled over Balearic Islands. They had maintained power because Almohad didn't think that they were powerful enough to even bother. They had also paid tribute in the past, so they were on good terms with the Caliph. However, in 1184 CE, the friendly ruler, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, was overthrown by his brothers. They began hostilities with the Almohad. There were still tribes in the Maghrib that were vassals of the Almoravids at one point. One such tribal dynasty was the Banu Hamad in Bajaya. Ali, the ruler of Banu Ghaniya, landed there with 30 ships and took control. This was a declaration of war. The Caliph, instead of trying to fight him in Africa, attacked his heartland, Majorca. However, the war in Africa raged on. The Caliph led an army to Tunis in 1187 CE. After an initial defeat, the Almohad were able to destroy the Banu Ghaniya and their Arab allies. Their final stronghold at Gafsa fell in 1188 CE. The Caliph returned to Marrakesh because he was afraid of his relatives plotting against him. One of these was his uncle, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim, who had been made governor of Tlemcen and had used his position to criticize the Caliph's plan. He was removed from office and was lynched by the crowd as he left the Caliph's presence. It seems that another uncle, Suleiman, governor of Tadla in central Morocco, had intended to join the conspiracy, but he was arrested. In Al-Andalus, his own brother, Umar al-Rashid, governor of Murcia, had entered into negotiations with Alfonso VIII. When the Caliph returned in triumph, Al-Rashid's followers deserted him and he went to Marrakesh, trusting in his brother's benevolence. None of the family of Abdul Mumin had been executed before, but the Caliph was taking no chances. Suleiman and Al-Rashid were taken to Saleh and killed. The Caliph is said to have felt great remorse on his deathbed for the execution of his relatives. The Caliph started his 6th year of reign, 1190 CE, by renewing jihad against the Christians. In these 6 years, the Christians had been somewhat successful, but they were always pulled back by their own rivalries. This renewed jihad was in response to 1189, when Sancho I of Portugal was able to take Silves, which was surrendered to him after a siege, which saw the Muslim garrison at Silves depleted of supplies. Sancho had help from troops from Northern Europe, who were going for the Third Crusade. Yes, the Third Crusade was raging at the time in the east, but its effects weren't really felt in Muslim Spain or Morocco. While the siege of Silves was going on, Alfonso VIII led a raiding mission deep into Al-Andalus, halting any attempts by Almohad to retrieve Silves. When the Caliph landed in Al-Andalus, he sent a force to take Silves, along with naval support. However, they were unsuccessful because the desert nomads had no idea how to lay siege to a city just like the Almoravids. The Almohad and Almoravids were more similar than they'd like to admit. At the time, the Caliph was in Cordoba, the capital of Almohad, Spain. There, he concluded a treaty with the Castilians. He already had a treaty with Leon, now Portugal was isolated. During this trip, he also visited Umayyad sites in Al-Andalus. The ruins of Madinat al-Zahra especially made an impact on him. From there, he marched on Torres Novas, north of the river Tagus. The city was surrendered to him and the Christians were allowed to leave. The city was ravaged as the Almohads had no intention of holding on to it. They had their eyes on a bigger prize, the greater fortress at Tomar. It was defended by the Templars. There once again, their lack of siege capabilities was on full display. After some 6 days, dysentery broke out, supplies and morale ran low, and the siege was abandoned. A grand parade was held to mark the return of the army, and letters describing the triumph were sent out. The Almohad were just all in on the propaganda. Reminds me of someplace actually. This caliph was determined to learn from his mistakes. He realized that supplies on the Portuguese coasts could be brought in by ships. So early next year, he began a siege of Alcázar do Sal, a small town on the coast south of Lisbon, known to the Arabs as Qasr Abidanis. This city wasn't important, but it could serve the role of a vital supply port for future campaigns. Once again, siege was laid to Silves. This time, however, they were victorious and took the city in a surprise attack. The caliph, satisfied by his victory, left for Morocco. The caliph spent the next 4 years on building projects. However, in 1195 CE, he went back to Al-Andalus. This time, he was challenged by Alfonso VIII of Castile. The king was so confident of his power that he didn't wait for reinforcements from Leon and faced the caliph because he remembered how ineffective the Almohad had been in the previous 2 decades. While the Almohad lacked the skills for a siege, they were more than capable of a field battle. Ya'qub was more capable and courageous than his father had been. Alfonso faced a humiliating defeat. Ya'qub, who now took the title of Al-Mansour, the victorious, took some strategic castles from Castile as well, but ultimately fell back to Seville, where he spent the winter gardening. Alfonso VIII sent ambassadors for peace, but Ya'qub was just getting started. See you next time.